As part of PlayStation's first digital state of play event of this year, Rocksteady has finally lifted the lid on what players can expect with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League when it arrives later this year. Set in the Arkhamverse as Rocksteady's Batman trilogy, the same one, the skills of all 4 characters were shown off alongside the much-rumoured Battle Pass, which many players feared would see the game skew closer towards a live service title than a traditional single-player game. Although Rocksteady has confirmed that the game can be played solo, but that an internet connection would be required to play at all times. Also shown off was each character's power level, upgradable gear system, and the Battle Pass, where players can earn new outfits, emotes, and various other items to customize their characters. So Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. GG chiming in once again. That game looks god-awful. There, I said it. And I don't know if I'd go so far as to say god-awful, but Lewis, you checked out or you caught up on the Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League stuff earlier today. Are you a fan of Batman games in general? Regardless, what were your first impressions seeing the gameplay footage?
I just feel like how long it's taken to make this game, the gameplay was extremely underwhelming, and I think a lot of people can agree with me on that. Like GG said in the comments, I just felt like, there was such high expectations for it, and just based off the 6 minutes gameplay they released alone, it's brought down people's expectations by quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to be nice about this. It just doesn't look good. It looks... I don't know. I love Arkham Asylum. I love Arkham City. Those games have gotten worse with every single entry. Like, Origins was okay. Night was bad. I didn't even touch Gotham Knights, but it looks... So yeah, this might be next in line and somehow be worse than Gotham Knights, because it has the problem I think a lot of games do these days, where they try to put so much into it without really thinking of how it would benefit the game. So I'm not to say that's on Rocksteady's behalf, because they're obviously a really talented studio. And this game's obviously been in some form of development hell for 10 years since Arkham Knight, maybe. But clearly somewhere someone's been like, okay, we need to have a battle pass because that's cool. We need to have gear. We need to have levels. It probably has a Destiny cursor, one of my most hated things ever. What was the other thing? The hero-specific gears and all that. Like,
yeah,
who asked for all this? It just gives me a big smell of the Avengers game.
Do you remember in the Avengers game, Scott, when you could upgrade Hulk's ribs to make him stronger? Yeah. I think that was a new high point for pop culture in general, when you were unlocking new sets of ribs for Hulk. Just have to say. But I mean, you make salient points. I wish we could have a more positive voice, because I'm sure this is the type of game that would appeal to people. And obviously it's 4-player online co-op, so much like other cooperative games, I know that I've had fun with like Borderlands in the past. I think you can get some fun out of it in that sense. But this is a canonical sequel. I think it's set around about 5 years later to Batman Arkham Knight. It sounds like I liked it a bit more than Scott, despite the back tank sections. But gaming editor Nathan chimes in as well with a salient point. Why can't anyone make a decent superhero game, he says. Bar Spider-Man, of course, feels like there's so much potential in that genre, particularly for Marvel rather than DC. And I totally agree. You have to think that, particularly the guys at Xbox, Spider-Man being a PS4, PlayStation 5 exclusive game, that they're just kind of like looking over that fence and saying like, why can't we have that? Meanwhile, you've got Warner Brothers clearly trying to pivot over what began as like a live service entry. Because I think the interesting thing about Gotham Knights last year was it wasn't a good game. And even though you could play as 4 different Gotham Knights, you could only play as 2 at once as part of the campaign. And me and friends were excited about that game. There were 3 of us, but obviously one of us had to sit out whenever we wanted to play online. At least Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League doesn't seem to have that issue. But Lewis, why do you think, obviously you're here, we're going to be talking about FIFA a little bit later, is the allure of having live service elements in your game simply too strong, to the extent that even with superhero games we're seeing it come up time and time again?
I think so definitely. I think with this game, the reaction just has, since that trailer got released, has not been good, and that's one of the reasons. I think the fact that's one of the reasons why the feedback hasn't been so great. And what I don't like about this game so far from what we've seen is that it just doesn't look any different to a lot of superhero games we've seen. It had some interesting cutscenes. That's what, like, cinematic moments in a way, but the gameplay itself, I think, fell flat. So yeah, it's not one I'm looking forward to, but like you mentioned there, I think that's something we see too often nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. And I think whenever you can see people like this is a current gen only release, is coming to PS5, Xbox Series X, and for people to be comparing it to the likes of Crackdown and something Gotham City Imposters, if you can remember that online game, it's not really the kind of dialogue and conversations you want to hear about your next big budget game from Rocksteady, which is one of the most celebrated superhero game developers. GG in the chat again. The first Batman game was great. I think they're referencing Arkham Asylum there. It went downhill after that in terms of DC. I think you may be being a little bit too harsh. I mean, people do love Arkham City despite the expansion as well. So the game's been in development, as you've mentioned, Scott, for almost 10 years. And it's clearly had a troubled development, if you were to ask me. It started off as one thing, potentially changed to another.
Like Scott mentions, like that, I think it's the name that sells, obviously. And we've seen with the Boys TV show and the success of the most recent Suicide Squad film that people love a superhero gone bad, storyline. So I think that there's no doubt an audience will be there when it gets released. But I can see people quickly not turning against it, but if it's anything like the gameplay shown, getting bored quickly.
I also think it's a Suicide Squad game where you kill the Justice League. Now that concept on its own is interesting, but then they're like, oh, by the way, they're actually brainwashed by Brainiac and you're actually saving the world. Have fun. It's the same problem with the first Suicide Squad movie. Just let people be villains. Let people be bad. They don't need to save the world. There doesn't need to be a world-ending crisis. Just let them do something. Peacemaker, the TV series, amazing. Like the best thing DC's put out, maybe ever, but definitely in the last few years. And that's not a story about how John Cena's going to save the world. It's just, let's infiltrate a secret society of insect people. And it's just a small group of people messing about. Best thing I've seen on TV in the last couple of years. And I highly recommend that one. It's disappointing he's not in the game as well. It seems very it's people from the original movie and King Shark. So it's like you can tell they had a different plan for where the series was at.
It just looked like any other third-person shooting game. Everyone was flying and jumping, and it looked like something we've seen dozens of times before.
Yeah, and we don't have to speak about Suicide Squad specifically. There are other state of play announcements we can go through. But the last thing I want to say is that's a crying shame, is that the always online connection for these live service games. Rocksteady did their best in that behind the scenes video, showing us that it can be played solo with bots controlling the other characters. So it's very still much a group tying game. But Scott, you mentioned earlier, and you're bang on that this is Kevin Conroy's last recorded appearance ever as Batman, not just in movies, TV shows, or games, ever, as far as I understand it, unless there's another DC animated film coming out with him in, but I don't think there is. So the fact that one day this game will not be able to be played offline. So if you go into a store, you buy a disc, you're never going to be able to play it. And Redfall got a lot of heat for this earlier this year, and I completely agreed with it then. Were Redfall not coming to Game Pass, I probably wouldn't play it, because I don't want to play a game that when I invest my money in, I know however in many years it's going to be worthless, or if my internet connection is not strong enough, why bother playing it at all? So yeah, the internet connection thing is something I have a real issue with as well. Yeah. Nathan is piped up again in the chat. He says, with the huge Marvel films particularly, there's so much lore that can't be explored. You think that games could pick up some of that and run with it? The Mephisto stuff from Loki, for example. And I kind of feel for the creators on this side, because these comic book universes, there's so much to pull from. And even though you've got more time to spend in a game than you have in just a 90-minute movie, condensing that into something that's logical and cohesive still is a challenge, I would say. Yeah.
So that's part of why I liked Midnight Suns so much, because you got the chance. Has anyone here heard of Nico Minoru? Or, I mean, we know Magic because she's an X-Men character, but all these like weird B tier Marvel characters, but it's like the most interesting thing they've done. I mean, Spider-Man's obviously cool, but it's like as a boilerplate AAA game, you know, it's good, but it's very much one of those, you know. But you wouldn't see like a Midnight Suns game, and even then they had to have the Avengers in it, which is the worst part of that game, to be honest. But there are so many things you can do with these universes. There's so many cool characters you can pull, and they're pulling Deadshot and Harley Quinn. I mean, Harley Quinn's good, but you know what I mean.
And Captain Boomerang shooting a shotgun's obviously very good.
He's
Scott.
good.
Yeah,
Big fan of Captain Boomerang.
Yeah, but again, you've already answered your own question, because Midnight Suns, great game. I played it for a couple of hours. I've just been so busy with other stuff, not had a chance to play it. But I did like dipping into these side characters, and then we get a couple months later, and it underperformed. And then the creative director Jake Solomon's leaving the studio. There's no evidence that the two are directly connected, but I think there's a reason why you see developers become risk averse to these, you know, delving in deeper and more nichely, and yeah, I think it's only going to continue with this live service stuff personally. So yeah, Suicide Squad killed the Justice League. I've yet to speak to someone who thinks it looks good.